First of all, to welcome and thank our invited guests on behalf of obviously the staff, but also the students. Of course, these events are first and foremost for the students, but also it's really important that we remind our guests, our panelists, that Domus is a really open and porous institution. So we have a lot of invited guests, and actually probably more, bellissimo, probably more invited guests this evening, or as many non-invited guests who have come to join us. And this reminder that we are an open institution is super important. And we have, I guess, 120 people online joining us, or perhaps more. So welcome also to those joining us online. But as a reminder, just a little bit about the foundations of Domus to inform also our guests. As we all know, Domus was founded by a pretty loose fit of architects and designers who only later were called the radicals by Germano Celant. And this challenge, the radical approach came very much from this idea of asking the right questions. More than giving the right answers, it's about asking the right questions. And tonight, our guest is here just for that reason, because not only for environmental, social, political, and cultural reasons, his work and their work as an institution is asking the right questions, but a bit different from some of the early radical stance is they're actually providing some pretty interesting answers as well, and some strategies and some, I don't like to use the word solutions, but let's say some strategies to deal with this issue of demolition. And after his lecture, we'll be having a discussion, a wide range of guests coming from different positions to discuss this issue of demolition. And I've actually got a very short description of Olaf. I think he's going to do a good job of describing himself. I promised I wouldn't give his birth date. But Olaf Grawert, where is Olaf? Yeah, there he is. Let me know if I make any mistakes on this. Is based in Berlin and Zurich. He works in technical and editorial roles. Is partner at 2038 and B+ in Berlin. Co-editor of What is Architecture and researcher and professor in the Department of Architecture, ETH Zurich. The rest is a lot of details about all the work they put together, which is incredibly interesting, incredibly pertinent to tonight's discussion. And as Olaf knows, we're actually working on a project with HouseEurope within Domus Academy on a project, very important project and a very controversial project here in Milan. So we'll talk more about that and introduce what we're doing. But we've invited you basically because it's our intention to support your work at HouseEurope. So welcome, and everyone please welcome Olaf to the Domus Academy.
Okay. Is it okay? Yes. It's maybe too loud now. Yeah, okay. Is it okay? Yeah, thanks for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. The title of the lecture is HouseEurope Learning from Italy, and I think it's kind of like important to understand that we as an initiative, a European initiative, have to learn from Italy, have to learn from all the countries that our initiative is taking place. It's an European initiative in several countries. So that's also kind of like my aim as a representative of the initiative from today's evening, especially the discussion, also to learn your perspective, the Italian perspective, the Milanese and Italian perspective on our initiative, how it could arrive here, how you could also support our initiative, and what you think about our legal proposals, because as an initiative we are proposing very concrete European laws that we try to bring into the European Parliament, so to kind of like from there then arrive in the several member states. So that's kind of like an overview of the lecture. I will start with a brief introduction, who we are and how we work. We have different entities. Then speak about practice, research, and politics as a last topic, and then introduce our initiative. And in the very end, we will watch a 10-minute film all together as a kind of like introduction also for the discussion afterwards. So we are basically acting between practice as an architectural office, teaching, and now lately as a non-profit, as a political initiative and policy lab. So as an office, we are B+, we are based in Berlin, and you see here some of our work, which was always focusing on the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. And this is also our mission as a kind of like newly founded office, because one of the partners, Arno Brandelhuber, founded the office originally already 30 years ago, but since 2 years we are in a new form as B+, 5 equal partners. It's a cooperative practice, so we all have 20%, and whoever joins the firm also gets kind of like shares in the company, so we are shareholders in our own firm, and this is how we work together, which is also our business model, and this is also how we take decisions or defined our vision to fully focus on this topic of the renovation and transformation of existing buildings. So this is the goal and the purpose of our office that we are working in Berlin. And I will introduce one build project later so you better understand how we do it. Then we also have a chair at ETH in Zurich, which is a great privilege because it gives us the freedom to actually research on topics and bring in also themes that we discover in practice. So a lot of the work we do, we focus on film. So our chairs for architecture and storytelling, all of the topics we are dealing with are actually coming from reality. So as an architecture practice, we want to develop a project. We are also developers ourselves, and then realize that actually you cannot buy any property anymore, or you cannot find any property anymore. Why? Because it's not clear who owns it, no? It's not one entity, one person anymore who owns things. It's like a loose cloud of shareholders who own things. So this topic of who owns the land and who owns property is something we deal with in our films and then also in our research. So as Station Plus, and you can visit the website and find all the films and projects by the students, we try to teach the students not only how you design a building, because a lot of chairs are doing this already very well. We try to teach the students how to design the argument to actually make this project happen. So how do you also convince and speak to people? How do you find a language and create an argument? I will also show a project. And the last entity is HouseEurope. What Tim already introduced, it's a non-profit. It's a policy lab, so we are working on the topic of legislation for years now. We founded this non-profit really focusing on the idea, can we not only work with legislation, and we always say don't complain about existing laws. This is also something that a lot of architects do. They love to complain that they could do something differently if the laws would be different. This is not our attitude. We try to celebrate the existing rules and then find loopholes in it. But at a certain point, we also realized that we are kind of like reaching the limits of this very playful way of dealing with laws, and actually came to the point where we say, can we write the laws ourselves? And this is what we try to do with HouseEurope. And I will start with a short film. That's always a thing, no? Sometimes videos don't work. I hope it works with the sound and everything. We start with a short trailer.
Work hard, be happy, work more, take care of yourself. Work harder, care less, earn money, don't speak about it. Architects are in high demand. Construction is flourishing, nominal wages are rising. Students get hired straight out of university. Statistically, we have rarely been better off. So why are we so unhappy? Architects have made a pact, low wages for creative freedom and fulfillment. But right now, this fulfillment is gone, as the deregulated market does not allow architecture to live up to its social aspiration, as the destructive consequences of architecture have become undeniable, as the architectural practice has become a financial instrument and an asset itself, between exploitation and extraction. We cannot ignore our influence on society. We cannot deny our impact on this planet. We cannot reduce our practice to wage labor. We cannot become voluntary prisoners of unfulfilling work. Instead, we need to focus on the social meaning of labor by confronting ourselves with the tasks of building, by conceptualizing our everyday work as political, by prioritizing, negotiating, and persuading, by collaborating, joining forces, sharing resources. Quiet quitting is not the answer. Loud dedication is. We cannot believe in the lonely genius. Work itself must be revolutionized so that we may commit to architecture once again, the business of architecture.
Okay, so this was the trailer for our publication. We did Business Architecture, Unternehmen, Architektur. The magazine happened in parallel to the restructuring of our firm. So we said, okay, if we already restructured the firm, why not kind of like document or reflect on this process also in a publication? And one of the quotes from the magazine that I would like to use is, the greatest challenge for architects today is actually to create a self-sustaining practice in times of post-growth. So what does it mean? No? Actually, it's represented by these two numbers. So especially in teaching, we realized that students are very aware. I think also a critical discipline is aware of the huge impact that the construction sector and the architectural world has on the environment. No? 38% of global CO2 emissions are actually from the construction and building sector. No? This is something that we all kind of like now know, so we are all aware of the role that we have. On the other side, 38% is the growth rate of the architectural and building sector in the last 10 years. So there is a gap between kind of like the reality, between how we practice what is happening in the market and a new understanding for actually the transformation that is needed within the discipline. And the magazine is trying to kind of like unpack this relation and also ask, how could one open or run an alternative practice that focuses actually on values that don't have a price yet, no? Because this idea of CO2 emission and our responsibility is nothing that is really reflected in the market yet. A few more numbers. Also, when we speak about what is a potential market and the market for the future, we have to understand that between working with the existing buildings and new construction on a European level, we have like a 50-50 rate. So 50% of the market is actually profiting or creating revenues within the existing building stock. 50% is coming from new construction. The numbers differ. I mean, the source is down there. Everyone can look it up. It's part of the European sector study. So every year the European Union publishes a sector study looking into the architectural and construction market, kind of like unpacking where does the money come from, where are people working, what are the national differences. While we have in East Europe way more new construction, we have in Central, West Europe, way more focusing on the existing. And maybe that's also the point where we can learn from Italy, because Italy is the country which has finds most work within the existing building stock. So it's the leading country in that regards. And in that sense, the role model for whole Europe, because the European Union, as part of the Green New Deal, or Green Deal, they say we are not allowed to say new, as part of the Green Deal, started the program which is called Renovation Wave, where they say the next 25 years until 2050 is the time when we have to renovate Europe. And they are looking into countries who are actually doing this already, focusing on the existing building stock, and there is no country that creates more kind of like revenues within the sector of existing buildings than Italy. And in that regard, also understanding what is the potential of this renovation transformation sector. So all European Union member states agreed to decarbonize existing buildings until 2050. What does this mean? We agreed as states that we will make existing buildings carbon neutral until 2050. Right now, only 1% of Europe is renovated, so 99% are meant to be renovated. And actually, we should renovate 99% in the next 25 years until 2050. The current renovation rate is 1%, so every year we only make 1%. So it would also take 99 years to do it, which actually means that we would have to work 4 times more in that sector, which is a huge potential, no? Because you can ask architecture offices, are you prepared to have 4 times more work? Can you, like, it's also a labor market, no? It's actually a huge potential, which is great for all the students. I always tell the students, you are studying in a fantastic time, difficult time as well, I know, but it's a fantastic time actually for architects, because this future renovation market is also one that needs small, decentral practices. It's not the big star architects firms who will renovate all these buildings, no? Because they are not structured in a way to do this. They are structured in a way to do the big projects, to win the big competitions. But if you want to renovate all the small-scale buildings in a fast time, you actually have to do it decentrally in smaller practices. So one question is, how can we shift the market, unlock the potential of the existing, and incentivize this change? No? How can we also deliver incentives for people to follow this? And are all of these facts actually enough to convince people? And I will continue with a short film again.
From France to the Philippines, from Jamaica to Japan, from Malaysia to Mexico, from Sri Lanka to Singapore, privatization is on the move.
Something new had been born. Its name was popular capitalism.
Popular capitalism is nothing less than a crusade to enfranchise the many in the economic life of the nation. We conservatives are returning power to the people. That is the way to one nation, one people.
Political means, you know, are you right or are you left? Or it means, are you blue or you're red, you know, green or whatever it is. And so it has already a kind of a negative or a, anyway, not a human face. And I can't change the word, but I think, how can you change it? How can you, maybe you have to go and say, instead of use the word, which is a problem with so many keywords, say what you mean.
Some of the greatest changes to the globalizing world are being written in the language of architecture and urbanism. So there has to be a chance, you know, that we know something about it. And I'm sure that we, more than the 28-year-old McKinsey consultant who's making most of the global decisions, I'm sure that we know. So without leaving behind our fundamental forms of education, trying to bring those along to think about another kind of form making which gets us closer to that, and also changing narratives, understanding what makes changes contagious in persuasions and in you know, discrepant messages and so on. It seems to me that there isn't any chance that a spatial change we want to make is going to be made unless we can not only design the thing, but design the advent of that idea into culture.
Something that I learned during this year is storytelling. Storytelling. The risk of a technocratic government is that in the way you communicate, you easily fall into a too specialized discourse, too technical, too difficult to understand, too detailed. You miss the point, and you should make a story.
So this was the trailer for our 2018, it's a while ago now already, film Architecting After Politics. It was the third film of a series. First one was Legislating Architecture, looking into laws and how we could use them as an instrument. The second one, the property drama, looking into the question of land ownership. And the third one, Architecting After Politics, was actually looking into alternative models, how to develop the city, not focused on profit only, models that already exist but are not perceived as real alternatives. No? So they are always considered as, it's nice to have them and they are kind of like funny, but they're never considered seriously by a broader public to be alternative models how to kind of like organize or run the city. And one quote that I would like to take from the trailer and the film is by Oana Bogdan. You saw her in the trailer, who is an architect and former politician. She went into politics, who said facts are not longer enough to really convince people, we have to tell a story. And this was also kind of like part of how we started the chair at ETH in Zurich with this question: are we as architects able to actually create this narrative and change narrative? And we kind of like have here very prominent figures from the movie, because on one side, of course, you have these powerful figures who were rhetorically so fantastic. If you watch and listen to Thatcher's speeches, how she was able to also come up with terms like popular capitalism and create narratives that a broad public would follow. Are we as architects trained to do it, or should we as architects start training this capacity and actually design the narratives, not only the building? So also the question, how can we not only design a building, but by designing the building, design a strong argument for that change that we want to see? And this is why I want to present one build project by the office. This is also where our studio is in Berlin. The project is called San Gimignano Lichtenberg. And I will guide you through a bit so you better understand the history of the place, because it's very important, and also why we were able to develop the project, acquire it, and transform it, or start the transformation, because it's not yet finished. So we are in the east of Berlin. This is former GDR territory. I think it's important to understand that this was once another country. It's not that long ago, no, there was the wall through Berlin, and this was in fact another country. If you arrive there by public transport or by car, you are basically greeted by the sign which says Dong Xuan Center. And what is the Dong Xuan Center? The Dong Xuan Center is a gigantic settlement of warehouses. It's the biggest Vietnamese community outside of Vietnam. It's a wholesale market where actually the Vietnamese community is buying and selling stuff. It's also important to understand that they were the biggest guest worker community in GDR. So this is the reason why they are there. And after the wall came down, they were able to buy it for low prices because no one wanted to have it. So this is what was there before. It was a state-owned coal factory that produced graphite coal products. So basically the whole area that is now the Dong Xuan Center was more or less, it was between a factory and a mine when you see historic images. And this was the central factory that was built in '87, so only 2 years before the wall came down. And of course, no one back then, 2 years before the wall came down, thought that this would happen. So it was, of course, more than only an investment, more than only a factory. It was also a symbol and a sign for technology, for economy, that the East is able to do what the West is doing. So it meant more to the people working there, because also of the socialist system, so all the workers were also shareholders. It was really a symbol for them. So when the factory had to close in '89, until today, no, because the people are still alive from that time, they see more in this place than only an abandoned factory. It has all these stories in its history. If we see before and after images, you will realize that the factory was actually demolished and only these 2 concrete towers remained. The first one is the silo tower, the second one is the staircase tower. The factory was standing there until 2010 because it was too expensive to demolish the factory. Only after the financial crisis, when the prices for steel went up, it was profitable to cut down the factory and sell the material. So it took until 2010 to actually demolish the factory, but the towers could not be demolished because they are too heavy in its concrete structure, so it made no sense. So all around these towers, you see the same warehouses, this 1-story high warehouses, and when you actually come closer to the property, you realize that these 2 massive towers are standing on a relatively, you could say tiny piece of land, and this is part of the reason why it would not or could not have been developed, no? Because, and here we come kind of like to the next point, we have to ask ourselves kind of like this value question, no? What happens when you have a property like this? The market does a very simple calculation, and this calculation is also the base of a lot of projects that we did, because you have the market price, so the property is on the market for a certain price, but the only thing that people can imagine to do is to demolish the building. So of course they say, I buy the property and then I have to pay for the demolition, which eventually leads to a land price on which you would build a new building. And depending on what you can build on it, you have square meters. So then you start calculating, is it a good deal or a bad deal? And then it's also a question of perception and what you can imagine, because everyone could only imagine to build more one-story high warehouses. This was the idea. Although you can build way more, no one was interested in it. No? So everyone said, that's a bad deal, we don't do it. So the question actually is, when you see it, what do you see now? Do you see like a building? Do you see a ruin? Or do you actually see a potential? Because the moment buildings are or were considered in Berlin a ruin, no one would touch them because it was always not profitable. And that's kind of like the same story for a lot of our projects that we developed, where the idea was always you can only demolish the existing, nothing else can be done. So in that moment, the challenge we had was actually how can you change the perception and how can you make people realize that there is a potential. So this is when we introduced this narrative of San Gimignano, which you maybe know is a town in Italy, no? Which is known for, Bologna also had a lot of towers. I know we always get then told Bologna had more towers. So it could also be Bologna-Lichtenberg, it's San Gimignano-Lichtenberg, a town, a village that was known or is known for the famous towers that were there. So we said, okay, can we actually project this narrative? Can we borrow and introduce kind of like this idea that it can be a beautiful place and something else can happen despite the failure of the past, which was at that time the narrative of the place. And that is why the first thing we did was actually nothing in the building, but it was creating this green hill. So the first thing we did as an intervention was, in that sense, not a building intervention, it was creating this green hill on which you would walk up and have this different perception of the place, which then led, and then it becomes a question of storytelling and story and communication, widely covered by magazines and newspapers. No? So we see here Arno standing on the hill in front of the tower, and it says Schöner Wohnen, which means beautiful living. No? It's the cover of the Zeit magazine, which is a supplement in one of the biggest newspapers, so a lot of people read it. And this, of course, helped us a lot to tell the story of the place, what it could be, which led to a series of articles and also documentaries, TV coverages, which then allowed us to also convince the banks, because that's the other side of the whole story, that not only the market is doubting that something can happen, also how do you finance it, which helped us to convince the banks that something could happen there. So if we look briefly at what we did, we limited ourselves to very small interventions, so all the openings are existing openings from the factory. We only appropriated the space and said, okay, what can happen in there and what can kind of like start this transformation process of the area or of the property. So in the ground floor we have our workshop. So here we have a scan on one side, so you better understand the building. So in pink you see the former silos, which are unused, and on the right side you see a plan, a section, and in red you see actually all the interventions we did, which are very minimal. So we just had to prolong the stair, because previously you would not enter the building from the ground floor. We had to extend the stair in the ground floor and also in the top level, and we created two heated spaces, one in the ground floor and one in the upper level. In one we have the workshop and the studio, in the other one the archive and the more quiet working places. So this is the only plan I will show. This is a before-after of the ground floor before and after the renovation, and then also of the top level before and after the renovation. So these concrete entrance slabs and the stairs is something that we had to add to actually access the other levels and also create a smaller space where you can work remotely, and then a bridge that actually leads to the roof. So in that sense, the renovation process itself was very limited, only using what was already there and appropriating these two spaces for the future use. But, and I want to use kind of like this drone footage of the area, what we also realized by doing this project is that it is not about one building, and that dealing with one building at a time is actually not enough. No? So we understood, okay, there's a lot of potential for renovation. This is how it looks when you're on the roof. And when you look around, you realize that all of this is basically undergoing transformations either needs to be renovated or will fall out of use, because also this Vietnamese wholesale market, that is of course very important to a community, is today selling products that we all agree will not be sold any longer. No, it's basically straws, plastic packaging, etc. So the question really is, what is our role as architects, and how can we influence also this transformation and help politics not to repeat the mistakes of the past by privatizing everything, but developing with a vision. And this is actually, so how do you not only design the thing, but the advent of its idea into culture, a quote from the trailer by Keller Easterling. So how are we able to actually design in the idea into culture, not only the architectural building? And this is also the starting point. I mean, we saw the same moment in a lot of practices of our initiative, HouseEurope. So what is HouseEurope? HouseEurope is a European citizens' initiative that gives power to the renovation of existing buildings and stops their demolition driven by speculation. So I understand that this is maybe not the common case in Milan or in Italy, because there's a very strong understanding for heritage. Maybe it's rather the opposite, that the heritage is overruling certain potentials. I think this we can also discuss later. But in a lot of places, and when you look at the United States, this is the history of the United States, how value was created in a constant chain of demolition and new construction. So this is happening in a lot of European cities, and this is the starting point. How can we actually stop the demolition driven by speculation and actually make renovation the new norm and the preferred option? One quote from the film that we will watch in the end, it's like a 10-minute short version of our film, The Demolition Drama. It's by the British economist Anne Pettifor, who is also a political advisor and helped co-authoring the Green Deal. The finance market needs new buildings as a collateral to generate more value and profit, and therefore it's necessary to constantly demolish and build new. I think this is a lesson that architects have to learn, or maybe that we don't learn also in university, that actually a lot of the buildings that are built are not built because they are needed. They are also not used. They also sit there empty. They are built as financial investments, no? So global capital is looking for a place where to go, no? Money is looking for a place. And the best place to go, and we did a research on it as part of the property drama, after every crisis, you see the property prices of land and real estate explode. Because in the moment of panic, people start investing into real estate and land. This is also why real estate is the biggest asset in the world. No? Over 50% of global capital is in real estate. And therefore, it's a bit of a naive understanding, I would say, if architecture universities look away from the political and economic dimension of what we teach or learn or practice, because of course it's political. It's the biggest value that exists in the market system. So in that logic, everything is up for demolition, no? Because if the market is looking for an investment, every building that has a speculative value in the future is up for demolition. We see this in Germany, where there's a study that was commissioned. How many buildings could you demolish in Berlin and replace with buildings that generate more square meters, more profit? It's over 70,000. So this study was really like a wake-up call that investors are looking for, because there's no land anymore, there's no vacant land, they are looking for new potential places where to invest, and then the chain of demolition and new construction starts. The best case where you can see this is actually when you look to Switzerland. They are the European champions in demolition for new construction. They even have a new word, which is Ersatzneubau, which means replacement building. So it's a reality of our students that they tell you, we are in an apartment for 1 year because then the building is demolished and replaced. They move in the next one for 1 year because the building is demolished and replaced. So what do we do as HouseEurope? We advocate for EU laws to make renovation more affordable, easy, and social. Because the demolition of existing buildings is as outdated as food waste, fast fashion, and single-use plastics, no? So we also try to come up with a language that we actually can convince people and make them realize that it is just outdated and not a practice that should exist any longer. And in that sense, renovation already is the best option for several reasons, no? Renovation saves homes by keeping the prices more stable. There's not a case where the newly built building is cheaper or as affordable as the building before. after building is demolished and newly built, there are less people living in more expensive apartments on more square meters. This is the reality, or it even sits empty. Renovation also saves jobs by creating more local work. This is something I spoke about in the beginning, this reality that it will boost actually the labor market, because right now most money is in material, no? Big architecture firms and construction companies have an interest to keep the system running because they make most profit with the material side of a project, and they try to reduce labor, no? They try to squeeze out labor of the equation. Renovation obviously saves energy by keeping what is there. I will speak briefly about our legal proposals. There is no value to existing buildings. There's emotional value, historic value, you have heritage, but there is no monetary value to the energy that is in the building. And the last one is also it saves history by valuing the existing. And maybe briefly, before we see the movie, I speak about our 3 legal proposals. So as an initiative, we make 3 legal proposals, bring it to a vote. We have to collect 1 million signatures across the European Union in 2025. If we are successful in collecting this 1 million signatures, the legal proposals will go into the European Parliament, and the European Parliament has dedicated itself to implement these laws. So the first one is actually something that, again, learning from Italy, Italy already has, also France has it, Belgium has it, Luxembourg. It's a VAT reduction on sustainable renovation work and reused material. The second one is a fair and transparent risk evaluation of existing buildings. Right now, the public can also not develop public existing buildings because of the estimated risk, no? They see a potential risk in the building and they themselves say, we cannot take the risk. So this is also a reason why a lot of existing buildings are sold out to private developers who say, I'm willing to take this risk. And the third one is a new evaluation criteria for the invested gray energy. So what I said before, the CO2 that is in the building, no? So once upon a time, this building was built, a lot of CO2 was emitted to build this building, but this CO2 is not accredited in any way. It's also written off, deducted by taxes, and this is something we try to change with the third legal proposal. So what everyone can already do, because we only vote in 25, is sign up on our website and enroll to stay informed, and then in 2025 help us collect the 1 million signatures. If we find 3,000 humans who help us, each would have to collect 365 signatures. So 3,000 people in Europe, everyone would have to collect 1 signature a day, which makes it more realistic to speak about the 1 million. Yeah. So this is our website, and I will now switch to the movie. 10 minutes, and then we are ready for the discussion.
So the point about land is that it's finite. I think it was one of the Marx brothers who said, we don't make it anymore. So there's a finite amount of land within an international financial system where there's an infinite, almost infinite supply of credit.
So finance is this very powerful force that through its speculative logic is the driving force behind real estate, assigning value through markets, onto goods, onto material goods.
I think that's the biggest fraud in the real estate speculation, that you take value that is collectively and historically created by people in the city, then you try to extract it from the very people who created it.
Our everyday lives are now shaped by the priorities of financial markets. Not just real estate actors are seeing our houses as an investment opportunity, but we, everyday people, everyone in society at the moment has an intuitive understanding where they sleep is not just material, it's an asset.
The real tragedy of this conspiracy by speculators, real estate developers, is that they're doing it in secret and we know nothing about it. And so we happily forget about and exclude those speculators and those real estate developers who are planning this moment to destroy the very fabric of our society so that they can make more money. Because if your land is finite, the only way you can keep reinvesting it and keep generating returns is by destroying it and starting again.
Is everything in the city up for demolition? I mean, potentially yes, because if we approach the land and the city through the speculative lens, then of course the biggest increase in value is through this constant demolition and rebuilding.
And it becomes a game of minimizing risks into a broader speculative market in order to attract the right investments that would allow you to survive as a housing association, as a housing structure.
The economics profession are those men are the guilty men. They have driven both the financing of our architecture, of our urban planning, and also, of our residential homes.
We often get the situation where a developer wants us to demolish a building because of their calculations of how much it would cost to demolish and build new versus renovate. If the structure in square meters is anything similar to what would be demolished in the first place, you find that all of the extra cost is actually an estimation of risk that has not been analyzed. We have a whole system that is very comfortable with financing new build because of the guaranteed return on investment.
And if you start in a competition with 10 people, 10 groups, and the developer or the one who, the HouseEurope, doesn't say, listen, you have to use this pre-existing garage or whatever it is to build a tower or to build whatever on top, then you're lost. You're fucked, so to speak, because the developer will always go to the ones that offer more FAR, to generate money.
And we also saw it also hand in hand with what we call build on the build. So it's also tightly connected to what happens to the landscape and to the territory as a whole.
I would go further in this and say no demolition should be allowed, except you prove that nothing can be done. Because in fact, the calculation, you can always make them good. So I think it should be a principle, no demolition, no arrangement.
We all know that together with agriculture, the construction sector is the biggest emitter of CO2. All the buildings that we see around are actually storages of CO2. Once upon a time, a lot of CO2 was emitted in order for these buildings to be built. One of the biggest problems that I see today is that the construction sector is not evolving according to the needs of people.
When a building is demolished, usually what it is replaced with is not to the benefits of the people who were occupying the previous building, which means that by extension, demolition is an antisocial phenomenon.
If I can sum up all the crises with which we are confronted, I would say that the sum of all of them is the fact that we reached the limits of a system. So the main problem is that actually things that have a huge value they cannot be evaluated. There is no price. They don't have a price.
And the question for me is simple. When you have one, it could mean one flat, one block, one slab. When you have one, you demolish one and you rebuild one. At the end, you have one. If you have one and you just add half of one, and at the end, you have 1.5. You spend less, you have more. No, so it is to think better, to be more intelligent in the way you build, you reuse, you add to existing situations. But this ambition is absolutely necessary, and for social housing or for any housing.
So this is about revolutionizing construction, rethinking entirely how we assemble all these elements. For instance, are they assembled in a way that they can be disassembled, of course, but also thinking about how a construction detail will be taken care of. Think about a window, for instance. Are you able to clean that window? Are you able to repaint that particular piece of the house, different depending on how it's built and things like that? So revolutionizing construction also means by design. What would happen if the entire labor force, which is currently used in new construction, would be rerouted into renovation?
You have plenty of architects that are able to understand the buildings as they are, to see what is missing there, how they repair that, how they transform that, what is the capacity of transformation.
Reinventing our construction industry is never about losing jobs and never about destroying existing trades, but about rerouting them into a virtuous construction industry.
So if we look at the problem of demolishing buildings the other way around and see the keeping of a building being stimulated financially, then, for instance, in Belgium, we do have a difference in VAT. VAT when you renovate is 6%. VAT when you build something new is 21%. So, of course, there is an incentive.
And to be honest, my experience is that a lot of investors and a lot of entrepreneurs really would like to have those incentives, would like to work sustainably. They're like you and me. They too have a conscience, really. And so if we gave them incentives to do the right thing, which is keep this building, make sure that we reuse it effectively and use it for housing, rather than destroying it and giving it as an asset to a global bank.
We can think of solutions that deploy the daringness, the openness, the radicality of speculation with what we already have.
Thank you. Going on from Olaf's presentation, we have a panel of guests who are going to discuss these issues, but also these issues as they stand now in Milan, as they stand in Italy. A panel of experts, hopefully with some similarities and perhaps also some different points of view. I'm going to invite Federica Zambaletti to moderate this conversation. I'll briefly introduce Federica. Federica is an architect, researcher, and digital curator. Her interests lie at the intersection of architecture, curatorial production, and regenerative practices. She is the founder and creative director of HouseEurope, which she founded as a student at the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London. Since its conception at the AA, HouseEurope has grown to become a research-driven studio and digital magazine, embracing a multi-generational and multidisciplinary discourse. They seek to nurture conceptual and material exchanges that would ensure more inclusive and just planetary futures. In fact, I think that's the main point of a lot of this discussion, not only ecological and social issues, but basically a bit more care and a bit more concern and a bit more, a lot more attention to where we live and how we live. So Federica, I would like you to introduce some of our guests. Thank you.
Yes, actually I would invite them to come to Nicola, Anna, and Giancarlo. I would like to invite you to join the stage. Super. So Tim, thank you so much for the introduction. Olaf, thank you for the inspiring presentation on the work that you undertake with HouseEurope. To our guests, thank you so much for being here this evening. We are delighted to have you here with us. As noted by Tim, my name is Federica Zambaletti and I'm the founder of the digital architecture magazine HouseEurope. I am truly especially pleased to be here with you, as with HouseEurope we wholeheartedly share the ambitions of HouseEurope and have, since our founding, countered the trend of most architecture and design magazines which praise new build and who rely on an economic model which praises and promotes the development of bigger, better buildings, at times also disguised as sustainable, whatever that word means anymore. Rather, sharing the need to tell new stories, we nurture unbuilt imaginaries, which focus indeed on non-extractive futures. This has brought us not only to give space through our digital magazine to those practices and initiatives which deploy a more generous approach to our built environment, but also engage ourselves through the research side of our own practice. We are currently looking into the more than 150 privately owned abandoned buildings which punctuate the urban fabric of Milan, lying dormant within a city which, on the other hand, continues to expand and consume soil. So at the moment, these 150 buildings accumulate to more than 460,000 square meters of space. That is the equivalent of 1.2 times Parco Sempione. And their built structure accounts for 406,000 square meters of building. If you had to put that in terms of 28 square meter apartment, that would be 14,500 apartments in Milan, which are just lying dormant. At the same time, Milan continues to expand. In 2020 to 2021, it has cemented 18.68 hectares of land compared to the only 2.32 hectares in 2019-2020. This means that in the last period, Milan has increased its annual land consumption by 8 times, exceeding the threshold of 58% of municipal territory paved over, a largely anti-ecological percentage. Between 2015 and 2021, the average purchase housing prices increased by 41%, rentals by 22%, whilst a person's income increased only by 12%. So at a time in which Milan continues to consume valuable soil, and here I mean it as our second biggest carbon sink after the oceans, and not in terms of economic real estate, who are we building for, and why are we not looking at regenerating our existing building stock? This is really what I would like to focus constructively today with our esteemed panel of guests. I will start with the presentations. Nicola Russi is an architect and professor of architecture and urban design at the Politecnico di Torino. In Milan, that's rich, okay. In 2008, he founded the design studio Laboratorio Permanente in Milan with Angelica Silos Labini, with which he won the international competition for the Farini and San Cristoforo railway yards in Milan, with a project developed together with the OMA studio, Climatic Agents. He participated in the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2014 and 2018 and received an honorable mention for the gold medal for architecture in 2012 with the project Il paesaggio non ha retro. His teaching and research work has been published in books and magazines including Domus Abitare and Architecture Ireland. He has collaborated as a consultant to the Municipality of Milan for the development of the new territorial government plan and with the Department of Architecture Design DPA and the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies DASTU at the Politecnico di Milano. Nicola, welcome. Giancarlo Tancredi is an architect and since 2021 the Councillor for Urban Regeneration of the Municipality of Milan. He has always been involved in urban design and planning within the city of Milan, with particular expertise in the most complex urban projects in our cities, including the Porta Nuova area, the Portello, City Life, Expo 2015 and Mind, the Darsena, the disused railway yards, Santa Giulia, and the stadium area. The professional experience developed encompasses the various issues that underpin urban regeneration and the implementation of the territorial government plan. Anna Tutor has an established experience in strategic communication and marketing developed through the conception and execution of complex projects in various sectors, from corporate to retail, from product communication to cultural communication. From 2014 to date, Anna has been head of public affairs for ETH Services Italy SPA and General Secretary Cultural Committee. Since January 2024, she is consultant for ETH and senior advisor for MA at Maroni Associati. I would like you all to give a warm round of applause to welcome our guests tonight. So, House Europe stems from the fact that today everything is up for demolition. In Milan, I would like to go a step further and say that every square meter is up for construction. With the exception of a number of case studies of demolition and reconstruction, such as the Torre Treves, which the students here at Domus Academy have been analyzing under the tutorship of Fosbury Architecture and 2050 Plus, in Milan, it's a matter of pockets of unbuilt land which are being continuously filled. Soil as some kind of investment. At this point, I would like to focus on the Atlas of Urban Regeneration, which is the document which reveals the more than 100 ongoing regeneration projects, both private and public, planned for the city of Milan. And I would like to ask you, Giancarlo, how are these projects set to transform the cities in the years to come?
Good evening. I'm sorry for my English is not very good, and I want to speak about reuse in the city of Milan. Yes, and I must read because but I hope you understand. See. I try. Milan has a lot of projects, yes, in the last years and in the next years. Projects over 5,000 square meters, very big projects, public projects, private projects, and public-private. And the city is changing. Is a strong process of changing, and is in Italy is the 45% of investments in real estate and regeneration, urban regeneration, are in Milan. And we think that the city is changing to overcome the radiocentric system of the city, to create new centralities in the peripheric areas, to overcome the radiocentric and the pressure in the center of the city, and to allargare, to
Expand.
expand the perimeter and the relationship with the municipalities that, in the metropolitan area. Okay. The strategy is the polycentric city. It's not the one center or two center, but most center in the city.
Yes, and it does so by filling in a number of voids, right? So if we look at, there's 18 big projects. If we look simply at, for example, the projects of the Scali, they're taking abandoned areas and they're, for certain percentages, adding more square meters. Milan, with projects as Porta Nuova and City Life, has developed a model, which Modello Milano, which creates kind of an attractive city, but which sometimes is rarely or for the people. So I'm wondering how these projects in the building up of a polycentric city are really conceived for the population, considering that they are taking land which could effectively be used as public space, right? Or reimagined as parks where one has access, but on the other hand, cementified within a context. I mean, we also saw today great amounts of rain, a lot of permeable surfaces. We have part of the city which looks like Venice. So how are these projects going in between creating an attractive city, which is, however, socially accessible by the people of Milan, and also both in terms of houses, but also really in terms of space? Yes,
the Milan is growing, and when a city is a city in the last year is a place to be, a successful city, a lot of tourists. We have increased the tourism, but the other hand of the medal, okay, is the same in Paris, it's the same in Berlin, it's the same in Barcelona. We have the increase of values, of real estate values, building values, and we have to answer also to the demand, the social demand of affordable housing. We are working very hard in this issue. Is not easy because the market is have the rule that in which the administration can't don't have the tools to regulate the market. We can encourage the affordable housing with agevolazioni, okay, and we are working, but not now, but since the last years, we are working to increase the affordable housing, but it's not easy because now there is a situation, a complicated situation in the market, and also due to the increase of building construction costs after the war in Ukraine. This is a problem not only in Italy but in Europe, but in Italy is very a problem, serious problem.
Sure. I mean, the other day in one of the lectures that we had from Oana Bogdan, who was previously on the trailer, is interesting because she talked about public commissions in Belgium as really being the spaces of experimentation, right? So as the kind of municipality being the point of reference which can really bring about change. And in this sense, if one looks at the number of regeneration projects which have been proposed recently, I think that one still stands out since 2019, which is the proposal for the Scalo Farini and Scalo of San Cristoforo, really because it brought about a paradigm shift. I mean, entitled Climatic Agents there, the value, the most important value, which up to that point had been the brick, and it continues, unfortunately, in part to be the brick, was the climate, right? Recognizing the vulnerability of an area. We find ourselves in the kind of northern part of Milan, which is the part of the city which suffers the most from phenomena as urban heat island, soil permeability, and Scalo Farini and San Cristoforo conceived together really put the idea of creating a biodiversity corridor on the map and putting that as a priority, not only for the people who would have inhabited the area, but also recognizing the importance of a space like that for the city. So Nicola, I wanted to understand how you went about developing that master plan and what kind of changes you wanted to see happen in the way that we approached planning and the kind of plans that you responded to in developing it.
Okay. May I confess something? We are not developing the master plan. So we won the competition, then the project was assumed to be understood inside of the Milanese documents of the master plan, and then the land was on sale and was bought by a company who is developing the master plan without us. So I have to confess, I don't know how it's going. I don't know if climate will be a priority, I hope. I hope the municipality will keep on pushing the new property on working with the same topics we were proposing in our master plan. Of course, what is important to me by my side is conceiving projects not only inside of the borders of the site property, but conceiving them as a link of a system of spaces, of green corridors, for example, to mitigate the heat wave during the summertime, for example, in Milan. So trying to conceive always our project as a part of something, and our final client is not the client itself, the one who pays, but the population. I have to confess that after years from Farini competition, today my interest is more about working with little municipalities around the city of Milan. So going back to what I did for the Comune of Milan years ago when I was tracing the 88 neighborhoods of the city, it was like a map that was somehow in opposition with the big transformations. It was like showing a chance for the city to transform itself inside of their local centralities and not just focusing on big transformation areas. Today we are talking about Milan, but Milan is a little center inside a big metropolis. It's 1.4 million inhabitants. The bigger way to conceive the metropolis is 6 million. So the balance is completely out of the borders of Milan. In Milan, the price of if you buy a house next to the subway, more or less you are up of 20% more because of you are well connected with public transport. This is the opposite of Milan. If you go in the metropolitan area and you want to buy a house next to the railway, it's very cheap compared to the new neighborhoods you can reach only by car. That makes a great potential for a new rethinking of the city, reusing the city, not only talking about the buildings, but also by rethinking the way of reusing infrastructures. They are already there. We paid a lot for them, and there is a quite wide network, a very sophisticated system of public transport. They are not used anymore as they were. And I'm organizing a research in Polytechnic of Milan on the reuse along these transit corridors. It's called TOR, T-O-R, which is transit-oriented reuse, and it's more about how to reuse this multiple constellation of little municipalities around Milan and conceive them as a new system of neighborhoods for the entire city.
Sure, so in a certain sense expanding the polycentric model beyond.
Yes, but not a polycentric model based on big transformation areas, more on a system of regeneration and reuse, much more like in little spaces, in already existing potentials that can be changed with a little amount of money. That's what we did also for Comune di Milano, because after we did the master plan, the general master plan in 2008, and at that time the municipality, they didn't understand our proposal, only their municipalities, they realized that the 88 new neighborhoods of Milan could be the way to set a system of policies very interesting for the city. I give an example like Piazza Aperte, open squares, comes from the idea that every neighborhood should have a proper system of public spaces. And I think the roots of this policy is strongly connected with the identification of these 88 nucleus of the city. I would like to expand the idea to the metropolitan area of Milan, trying to also change the cultural idea that what is out of Milan is another municipality, and it should be a neighborhood for everybody and in strongly connection with all the other neighborhoods. So a more democratic distribution of richness around the city and not centered into the city center of Milan. You are doing it.
No, and I really want to kind of go back to that, because our research, for example, looks at these more than 150 buildings and trying to understand, like at the moment, they lie dormant. I think what's incredible that the municipality did back in 2014 was start mapping them. So there was a first map, a first survey which was done, in which all the abandoned buildings, whether they went from a single family house to entire abandoned offices to ex-industrial areas, because of course Milan has a wide variety and history of these areas. And at the same time, they also developed, so first time a survey was done, and then a regional law on renovation was put in place. And the regional law stated that if the owners of that house didn't act within 2 years, the building would have been demolished and reconstructed. I would like to ask the municipality to explain a little bit the regional law. And out of the 150 buildings to date, 30 have been demolished and are being reconstructed. One was actually a beautiful building, which was historic but not recognized by the superintendents, and is turning into high-end luxury. But if that law brought to 20% of these being demolished, what laws, what incentives can be put in place so that what Nicola is talking about in terms of an expanded metropolitan area, which I think is important to keep in mind, because defining Milan by its municipality is something which belongs to another century. How can we work with new regulations which really incentivize private property owners to redevelop, and not redevelop to do Airbnbs, but rather redevelop for the city?
In Italy, the buildings, only the public buildings, after 70 years from the building, the construction, are subject to restrictions and vincoli. Only public or private buildings with that the owner ask to the soprintendenza to vincolare to the building, or third party can ask to superintendenza to list the building, the private building, but with justification. The national law is this, as it's not easy to for a municipality to change and to change this framework. Okay. And now we are working to a new land government plan of the city, and we are working about new rules to save the existing buildings that are typological or architectural, that have some quality. We are thinking about two typologies. One typology can have an architectural or typological interest and industrial memory, okay. And we are thinking about the agevolazioni, incentivi to
incentives
through paying less fees, or other incentives. And another typology, when the building is very interesting, but not tutelato, adesso non so come si dice, okay?
Not listed.
And we are thinking to oblige the maintenance of not all the building, but the 60-70%. And this don't exclude the possibility of to realize new buildings in the same site to a good dialogue between the historical and the contemporary architecture. And we are thinking this is one issue that's very important for the next plan, to save the existing buildings that are values, architectural values.
There is an example of, if you go to the last slide, of the type of urban fabric we're mapping. We have plenty of these in the city, and this is the intention, to map them, to list them, and to say you can demolish only 30% of it. 70% of it, you should reuse it. You should create a dialogue. Like the example we saw before. Like, for example, you know Gucci in Mecenate?
Yeah.
If you go to the first slide or other examples.
Yeah, maybe just to add to this, no, because I think sometimes it's very helpful to just look outside the own country, how others do it, no? That's like, I think something that Europe does not do very well, to understand that there are other countries on our continent who already implemented certain things. But at the same time, of course, we have the European Union, so all the European countries signed kind of like the contract, and until 2050 we will be climate neutral in our building stock. So for instance, what Stockholm did, and then I would come back a bit to the argument you made before, that it's difficult to do something. I would doubt this, no, because as policymakers you could be the ones who write the rules. Berlin stopped selling city-owned land, only gives it in a leasehold model, no? The developers can still build, but they don't own the land. The value of the land stays with the city, something they got inspired by Amsterdam and Stockholm, who do this since decades, no? And Stockholm did something with the existing buildings. They said, so we know how much CO2 we are allowed to emit until 2050 as Europe. So we can calculate how much we are allowed to emit as Sweden. So we can calculate how much we are allowed as Stockholm. So we give contingents. And we say, you are only allowed to build within this contingent of CO2. So in that moment, the existing building gets a value, and no developer says, I will demolish it. They will always build on top, transform or expand, because in this CO2 contingent, because they gave it a price, you would not throw away what is already there. Even more, the developers realized you have a huge time bonus, no? Because permitting processes are slow. I don't know how it is in Italy, in Germany.
Even slower.
Okay. Permitting processes are slow. The new build is not as safe as it was. So this idea, I demolish and build new because I get all the materials off the shelf, this changed, no? With the pandemic, with the war. So there's a time bonus in the existing. So keeping the building has so many incentives that all by a sudden it makes no sense to demolish or to leave vacant, because you don't speculate with it, because it has this time factor. So I think there are ways how to incentivize owners to do something with empty buildings and developers to keep it very practically around in Europe already.
Indeed.
Yeah.
We're working on it. We have a discussion with C40. So we are working with them on the making it more profitable for developers.
And I think the same thing is to define a vision for the city, because I mean one cannot be naive. No, on one side we enjoy all the private developments and say like privately developed spaces are great because they offer these spaces of consumption. I mean, we cannot on one side all enjoy consuming, but then complain that these places are private. So the public has to develop a vision where we say, how can we coexist, different groups of society, no, with different incomes, and then follow this vision or enact this vision.
Yes, I mean, the reality is that it requires a paradigm shift, right? So in Italy, we're very much based on the fact that if it's listed by the Sovrintendenza, then one does not touch it, and if it's not listed, it's up for demolition. I'm really interested in the 70-30 to also understand how was that defined. I mean, is the 70-30 because that's where you realize that most of the buildings, actually, the building stock allows for 70%, which is still healthy, or what was that calculation?
Some freedom for architects and developers to make a project, as the example is too.
Sure.
It's a sort of freedom. If you freeze 100%, when you have, for example, like the fifth one, in factory, then you don't have enough space to move. Like in Prada, there is this, probably the example is from Prada.
It's contemporary and historical, yes. Yes. But we have another problem in Italy. There is the legislation about soil remediation. If you wanted to reuse an industrial building and you want to put in the residential housing, you have to clean the soil, and if you don't demolish, you have more expensive cost. It's more expensive to remediate the soil. And the parameters of the Italian law in the remediation and in environmental are very strict. I think more strict than in Germany or in France. This is a problem because the cost of the
process
is yes.
For developers.
But you're talking about contaminated soil, right?
Yeah, yes, but in industrial areas are all contaminated.
Yeah.
Because Milan was a big industrial city, one of the biggest in Europe, and more than the half of the city was industrial. All the industrial sites are contaminated, and the Italian law is very strict for the remediation of the soil.
Plus,
this
I would
is
add
a problem.
the problem of earthquakes. So every time we try to keep a building, there is this problem, soil reclamation, plus the new rules of earthquakes. They are completely different from the structure you find. So even if you say, okay, I'm going to keep the structure, at least it's the structure the problem. So I understand there are many issues.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, as a practicing architect within the context of Italy and having worked on a number of adaptive reuse projects, whether in competitions or actually undertaken with private clients. What are the biggest struggles? And I would love to then maybe have an understanding also in Germany, where
there is a cultural problem, I would say an aesthetical cultural problem. This is something, I mean, I want to put in the table. It's not the biggest one, but it's another point to discuss together. New buildings, they want to represent the client in terms of richness, technology, showing up their sustainability. And it's really hard, at least here in Italy, trying to convince that keeping the structure, even if the structure is okay for earthquakes or the soil is clean, the structure just reused could represent their investment. So there is also something to, I think, about a narrative. It should be like promoted, a new narrative in reuse, because sometimes reuse is not seen by clients as something that is representing their investment. I would say that it's like cars. Sometimes they look at the buildings, the new buildings, like cars. They just want that something shiny, reflecting. And I have just a little example in front of my office, a famous Italian architect. He was demolishing a beautiful building, very simple. It was used by university to do some classes, and it was a new housing building was rebuilt there. I don't know if their soil was contaminated or not, but now it looks like a supercar parked between old buildings. It's reflecting, shiny, it's completely out of context, but this is also something about talking with the same language, aesthetical language. When we did reuse projects, the biggest one we did is Bagni Misteriosi with the buildings connected. There was a special client, there was a theater, so they didn't know that the structure could be left like it was. They started playing their plays during the working site. They used like fake walls to do their shows. I mean, they do, it's in their DNA that something could be without the aesthetic of finished and like sleek and posh. But that client was very special. In general, there is also this problem. I mean, just the cultural institutions, they accept something like this. Hangar Bicocca, Fondazione Prada, Bagni Misteriosi, Teatro Franco Parenti, but the normal private property is still a little bit afraid.
I can add something to this. First of all, are you all architectural students? All of you? No. Okay. What Nicola, I think there's a mind shift that has to come about, because in the moment that he's an expert of reuse, I am not. So I'm not an architect. But if architects, but not only architects, but private firms, public citizens, understand that the waste of anything you produce can become a value, a reusable resource that can also become business if it's done properly. There is a project in Politecnico that is working on, that talks about all the scraps, all the wastes of any building project. You know, when you build a project, any kind of a building, whether it be a square, whether it be a house, whether it be a hotel, all the scraps, all the wastes that are used to build this reality should be reused, transformed, and if it's done properly, it becomes a business. It can become a business. So there's really a mind shift that has to go on that hasn't yet, because if you talk to a private firm, someone presented this project for a project that for the requalification of Piazzale Loreto, but it can be applied to anything. The private firm says, but this is going to cost money, and what's in it for me? Because the mind shift is missing. The mind shift is that if you understand that all the scraps and all the wastes that go from every single detail in building a building or anything can be transformed in one form or another, and can even go so far as to be transformed into objects or into products or into a commercial line. I mean, you have to be creative, and you have to invest your curiosity and your time and be willing to create something that then can become a business. This, I think there's an example in Rotterdam that I don't only think, I know there's an example in Rotterdam that I'm sure Federica and Nicola can explain better than I, because I know very little about it and I've never seen it. But this is going on in the world. It's not going on in Italy yet. But on the other hand, I would just wanted to say that there is a law that is being discussed now in the Italian government that one of the pieces of this law encourages the reuse, the renewal, or the replacement of already urbanized areas and everything that's within them. I have to read that because I'm not used to talking about this in English. I just wanted to add that to what Nicola just said.
Sure. No, I mean, I think we really need to get creative, because in Italy we're amongst the highest consumers of soil, whilst our population is declining. So the two statistics really don't seem to meet up. I mean, one goes in one direction and one in the other. I had it in the presentation that, I don't know, a kid which is born already comes up with a certain amount of cement, a dowry of cement, just because he inhabits this world. So it's really a matter of getting creative. And I understand the 70-30 in the sense of allowing for space, but if we go back to the Magnifico San Gimignano, how much did you actually change there? Like, it was almost a 10% or 5%. And how much did the space define the way that you used it? Like, where were the thin lines in saying, okay, we wanted to make an office space. Did this work as an office? How did you negotiate? Because I think at the end of the day, we need to really get creative and start negotiating and put aside the fact of saying, okay, I want to make this project. I need to adapt my project to the space and, of course, keep the function. But we really need to start changing also the way we approach negotiating.
I mean, in the end, we changed very little. We never evaluated it in percentage. We basically changed nothing. Of course, we added, but what we added, we thought, how can we do it in a way that it would last? So how can we justify the investment that is done? I think that this is something our practice does, where it comes back to the aesthetic, but it also comes back to understanding that this is a business model. I think it can only become circular and reused, even the waste, if it's material honest, no? So all the glued components cannot be reduced. It immediately becomes waste. I think when you see San Gimignano, I understand it's not a prototypical project. There are not so many silo towers around the world that, you know, it's more about the concept and the idea, but also the understanding, can it become a story that is told and something that maybe starts this cultural shift, not this change. So an example that people start realizing, okay, you can do something, no? And in that sense, even high-pricey, exclusive reuse projects are a better answer than demolition, because they make people realize renovation transformation is an option and possible. Where I would not agree is that architects are looking for 30% freedom, because from a German perspective, there is no freedom in new construction. All the towers that are being built, and it's horrible because in the European cities, these new quarters are named always European quarters. In Zurich, in like wherever you go, all the same. And it's all the same building. It's literally the same building by the same construction firms who have shares in the manufacturers. So they buy architecture offices. That's also something that is not known, that construction companies own offices in Scandinavia. The biggest conglomerates own 10 offices 10 offices compete for a European competition. Doesn't matter who wins. In the end, the same one will build it. They will build structurally the same building, the facade looks different, a bit more shiny or whatever. So no architect finds freedom and pleasure in doing these buildings. If you speak to architects, everyone says, I'm way more into transformation because it's a challenge. I have to think, I'm challenged. The other model is basically, deciding for the facades. It's core and shell, and you basically only do the shell because the core is always the same. All of these projects we see, there is no freedom in these design projects. And I think that there, architects have a responsibility, but designers have a responsibility. Everyone who designs and gives a shape and creates an image and tells a story, that all of these should be an argument for this transformation and change. And therefore this aesthetic discussion, I mean, we are looking into this with our students in Zurich. They are looking into 9 buildings, realized buildings, renovation, transformation into housing. Because we know so many fantastic renovation projects of former railway property into exhibition spaces, former cooking factory into a villa for an art collector. That's fantastic. But in the end, 2 humans live on 1,500 square meters to show their art. That's great. But this is not the story we can tell to the broader public, because where shall they find all these cookie factories? You know, and why should they all live on so many square meters? So the students are looking into very practical examples where they transform existing buildings, and there are several ones. I mean, Oana Bogdan did a transformation of an office building into housing. Why was it possible? Because if they would have demolished it and built new, you would have not been allowed to build that high. So the developer said, I'm in. There's a fantastic one in the Netherlands, bank into housing, high price. It was sold for 8,000 square meters, 8,000 euros per square meters. The construction costs were in the end 1,200. So ridiculous margin. The city should have controlled this, no, and should have harvested this potential to make it affordable housing. Or in the Netherlands, and then I'm kind of like at this, consumers want the shiny surface. Consumers also don't know that so much money goes into the shiny surfaces. So in the Netherlands, you have a different understanding. There was a project where the city wanted to renovate a huge housing block, a gigantic housing block, and they estimated the costs. And because of the potential risk here, because you don't know what you find behind all these plaster walls, no, the engineer would say, now we don't know what is behind, better demolish and build new, because there is maybe something behind you don't want. So the city said, it costs too much, we have to demolish and build new. Then the private developer came and said, sell it to me. In the end, they renovated it for 1/7 of the cost that the city estimated by stripping the building down and reducing it basically to core and shell. And then they offered the core and shell building to customers to buy for a square meter price of 1,500 euros in Amsterdam, no, which is basically a social housing price. So it's possible if you think differently, but no one thinks that way because they want a shiny car. You know, and I don't think that they want a shiny car because they like shiny cars. The shiny car offers more potential to invest money. So they are looking for the most expensive building, and what is really fucked up is that architecture honorar is tied to the building costs. So the more expensive a building is, the more I can earn. Yeah, well, that's not an incentive for me to build cheaper. Because when I'm an architect, it's like, I always say it's like if you tell a dentist you are paid based on how much teeth you pull, then the dentist will start pulling teeth. You know, and we as architects are paid based on building costs. Yeah, I have no reason to make it, you know what I mean? It's really a systemic problem that needs to change. And I mean, if we are part of this problem, so maybe we should speak about, like, address it, because we benefit from it, you know?
No, and I think in the video, Anna says, today we are not paid for the value that we generate as architects. We are paid for the time we spend to produce the deliverables that are necessary to get the building permits, get the dossier for the contractors to make the bid to build the project. And that just really struck me. I don't know, quantified my time, but essentially, yes, it's part of a value system which is inherently, at the moment, a little bit off compared to those which are the challenges that we face. And in this sense, I mean, you both work in between policy and practice, and I would also like to hear from Anna also in terms of legislations. Like, there's so much that one can do in the practice, right? But then where and when do policies really need to step up? Maybe, yeah, Anna, if you could share a little bit of your take on the policy aspect.
I have to read it because I'm used to saying it in Italian and it's complicated to say
No
it in
worries.
English. Well, someone mentioned before, I won't go into the law that already exists. What I do want to say is that Italy is definitely more advanced, and a couple of people mentioned it before, and so did Giacomo to me the other day. But right now there is a framework of a law on urban regeneration which is planned, which the first objective is to bring order to the thicket of the various municipal and regional regulations and provide a framework that can be used for everyone. That's the first thing. But the objectives are, the text provides for the following things. It provides for preservation of historic centers, presentation of design competitions, tax incentives. Someone before mentioned they already exist. They do, but this actual proposal is talking about a tax incentive which should have 65% deductions for renovations and energy upgrades and 50% for the purchase of energy in classes A and B. This, as of today, you mentioned it before, Olaf, doesn't exist. And it will introduce targeted set of simplifications and amendments to existing regulations to encourage the rapid approval of urban regeneration and interventions. In particular, the DDL is currently being approved by the DDL that is currently being approved by the Commission and refers to the European goals of the zero net land consumption by 250. So it wants, as I said before, to encourage reuse, renewal, or replacement of already urbanized areas, to realize strategic infrastructure for environmental sustainable development, to apply the criterion of zero balance of land consumption, to elevate the quality of life of historic centers as well as in the suburbs, to go back to what Nicola was saying, that I fully agree with him, to encourage the implementation of social housing, which Tancredi was talking about, to encourage active participation of inhabitants in the design and management of urban regeneration programs, which is something that Italy and even the city of Milano try to do, but frankly, I think there's a lot more work that could be done. It's not easy because what House of Europe is proposing, first of all, it's not easy. It's difficult to put together that many signatures to bring proposals to the European government. Frankly, I think it would probably, I think that structure of bottom up and therefore signatures for a law is beautiful. But personally, I think it should be put together by people who are capable of bringing it immediately to the government, which is what the firm that I'm working for right now, senior advisor, does, because I think it should be, as all things, when you say citizens should be more involved, which is big work. It's not easy because people tend to be individuals and think about themselves. So to create a citizen, a broad consensus is very difficult. But I think one should think about a structure that talks about citizen consensus and people who have the capacity to be able to maybe fast, make it faster, because otherwise it becomes very, very slow. Certainly the other theme that's important, because as I said before, I'm a strong believer that anything one does, it has to have an interesting effect for the individual. So if it's a private individual, he's not
he's not a social, a non-profit, he has to make money. But that's true also for the public institutions. So one project, one other term that it's not a law, but another tool that I think is important and that should be used more and more is the public and private partnership, which involves a model of collaboration between the public and the private sectors with the ultimate goal of realizing public interests. But it turns the whole thing around. In other words, because it's a form of collaboration that in the outcome of a long process of change that's developed over the years, changes what used to be the vision of how it, usually it used to be the public authority tells you, you have to do this, and the private authority says, okay, I'm interested in doing it, I'll do it. Advantage, zero, for the public and for the private, because very often what happens is that the public doesn't have the tools and doesn't have the know-how to be able to do things that the private does. Instead, the private has the tools and obviously can also look for investors. But each one of them has to have an interest. So if the public says, okay, I'm going to give you this amount of money for a project, let's say, gives you 10% of the cost of a project, and you put up the 90 or the 80, 90%, you have to be able to work with an advantage. I mean, you say, the private says, okay, I'm going to do this project. In return for the money that I'm going to put up, let's say, to build the railway tracks and cover the railway tracks of a project, I want to be able to build residential, hotels, commercial buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes a doubt des, but it becomes a doubt des where the value of the public entity grows because of the project that is built and has a sense and has a return, not only for the private but especially for the public. Because what I'm talking about basically is where there is also public ground. So that's another possibility, the public-private partnership. It's really not used in Europe. It's used to a very small amount for urban regeneration. In Italy, it's practically not used. It's been talked about now on certain projects in Milano, but it hasn't been used. But even if you go to look at the stories in Europe, you don't find a lot of examples of public-private partnerships for urban regeneration, which I think is an important implement, it's a tool that we need to learn how to use. But on the bottom line, I think that most important thing is to look at the possibility of working more as a team. It's not easy. I mean, Giancarlo knows very well how difficult it is, and any architect that's worked on public or private projects knows how difficult it is. But it's a mindset, and I think it's an important mindset. I think the only thing that can really change what's going on in the world and what's going on in Italy today is really try to change a mindset. Keeping in mind that there are tools, government tools, that need to be implemented, that need to be pushed, but they exist, and the ones that exist in Italy should certainly, in my opinion, be taken as examples on a European level. But I also think that on a European level, what House of Europe is proposing is fantastic, but it needs to be implemented with other instruments. I hope that was clear, because I don't want to go into the technical details. I don't think you're interested in them. So since you're all students, I tried to be synthetic and clear and throw a couple of ideas in.
May I respond to it? Because I would totally agree. Because I think it's not I think on one side it's an ideal scenario that citizens realize that they are citizens and they should become active, because it's like very pointless to constantly only complain. no, and outsource this problem and say the developers are doing this, the politicians are doing that, like it's the owners and tenants are raising the rents, so there is potential to act and start something as an initiative, no? And ideally, I mean, so in parallel to our initiative in Berlin, a local initiative with the same goal started. They asked us for advice, and the tools are very different because our legal proposals are European level proposals. The Berlin ones are very different, no? Because they are way more practical. The European Union cannot influence local politics. Also, no one would like this, no? No, let's be honest. No country would like that the European Union influences local politics. So I think it's also a call to action if someone is not happy with the situation to think of what could they do on a local level. Nevertheless, I think there is this beauty in this tool of direct democracy also to make politicians realize, and 1 million is maybe not enough, hopefully we will collect more, make politicians realize that the topic is something that they should also take for themselves. Because the problem is that a lot of these topics are not made to campaign on a local level. A mayor of a city won't start the discussion with the developer because they have a too short election period. After the election is before the election, so they are already in mode for campaigning and they don't want to touch the unpleasant things. This is also the story of the European Union, that everyone says, we send to Brussels the leftover politicians and there they only want to tell us what to do. Well, that's also a very biased story because all the countries are also very successful in outsourcing their unpleasant decisions to Brussels. So if you only give the mean things to be decided in Brussels, of course the public perception is that the European Union tries to forbid things. Well, because no local politician dares to do, no? And also what you read, words like encourage, this is not a clear thing. Because I would be totally with you, it's about deal making. We also proposed in Berlin, let's allow the whole city to be built one additional level under the condition that the same square meters you build on top, you ensure in the same building as affordable housing. So you tell the owner, build 400 on top, but by law, you are obliged to have 400 square meters in the same building forever as affordable housing. We went to the real estate association, they all agreed. They all said, yes, of course. The value I can create with the penthouse, I'm totally fine to have one level lower, like in the ground floor, as affordable housing, because I can create way more value. But as long as politicians don't think also in what you said, incentives, and you have to earn something. I mean, of course, we all wish that or maybe we don't all wish, but I think a part of society thinks that we have to change the economic system. I would wish that things that currently have not a price get a price, but that's a long-term thing. As long as we don't agree, a majority of society, that we want to change the system and therefore have to act in the existing system, I also think that these deals and incentives are the only way to do it. Because everything else is very idealistic and we cannot either wait that humans become better humans, it's not going to happen, or we need to have rules and define it, and therefore words like are encouraged, that's propose something concrete, yeah.
For example, all the people here that are listening to us are students. Okay? There's a city in Italy, it's a bit off of the topic, but it's an example. There's a city in Italy in the region Marche, in Fano, where the mayor of Fano created a board of students, not even university students, middle class and high school students, to work and to propose with the city of Fano. Something like that's been done in Milano, but I don't think it had much of a follow-up, to propose projects. So we're talking about small children, but when we say, that the population should become involved, and then we throw that on the table, and then what happens? Very little. So I really think that we should make that, that it's not only a question of municipalities or of government, but of a system, that we should try to encourage some ideas. I don't have a solution off the top of my head, where young people, it's the same thing in politics. Everyone says, politics, whether it be right, whether it be left, young people are never really involved. When I say they're never involved, they're not listened to. You know, like we're sitting in a conference, in a talk, and we're talking one way. So there must be a way to really to listen to youth and to get ideas from them, because if we don't do that, I think we're always going to be sort of in a closed vase with a top on it, you know. And I'm sure that there must be an idea or a system where it's a lot of work. It's a work on who invents it. So whether it be the municipality, whether it be House of Europe, whether it be a group of architects, I don't know. And it's a lot of work on the part of youth, because they say, okay, I already go to school, I don't have to make an effort to do this. But I don't know, I think it's something that, you know, that really should be stimulated to give answers to try to get new answers and new solutions.
Yeah, somehow, however, I absolutely agree. On the other hand, talking about building new narratives, if one looks at the kind of buildings which have been dropped in Milan, if one looks at Porta Nuova, if one looks at City Life, if one looks at the projects which are underway, as a student, I would look to them and say, those are not for me. Like, there are these super shiny objects, which if I go into a kind of either banking system or insurances, okay, my office can be there, but either I go there to consume or they're not projects for me. So maybe I feel a little bit alienated in having access to them, whilst another kind of language of building is a little bit more generous, is a little bit more welcome, says, you are welcome here, you don't need to be wearing a suit or you don't need to come here and spend X amount of money to have access to such a space. So on the one hand, I really do believe that as young people, we need to be more engaged. But at the other time, we need to plan a city which creates structures which call for inclusion and don't call for, okay, if you're one kind of a person, you can have access here if you're, or not. So that is a little bit still of a thin line.
Yeah, but sorry, Nicola, but it depends on the projects, okay? If you talk about the requalification of a square, or squares, like what was done with Piazza Aperte, which is a fantastic project, it's not a good example because there were a lot of people that were involved in that, but it's just to say that I think it depends on the projects and on a mind frame that's really missing. I mean, I can understand that who does the two projects that you just talked about doesn't really want to talk with young people, but I'm sure that there are a lot of projects where they should be involved. Sorry.
I am the one who complains about the laws. But I just want to add another level of complexity. When we talk about politicians, it's not just one single thing, but it's a very intricate system of laws and powers. So I'm sure that when they want to change something, it's really difficult to understand if they can, and because there are many laws in contradiction, especially in Italy. And then you imagine in Italy there is an urbanistic law for each city. There is not a national urban law. So when you want to build a new building in another city, you need to have a local architect from there, because they even call square meters in another way. They consider square meters in a different way.
Same in Germany.
It's crazy. So, and these different levels make also for politicians who work in public administration a lot of conflicts between them. They are more into having conflicts between them than with private property. I mean, it's much, real war is between them. So I'm talking for you. I mean, you have space too.
I agree.
So this problem is really difficult to be understandable for us, and it's more about you. I just want to conclude because I found a very nice sentence made by Claude Lévi-Strauss, argued that the bricoleurs' tool, unlike the engineers, cannot be designed in advance. The materials at his disposal do not have a precise destination, since each can be used for different things. I think this is a key point for us as architects in dialectical discussion with engineers. That's when we talk about reuse, the point is, the difficult point to discuss with engineers is not to control everything from the first step. Because we do know that engineers, they used to copy their models in every context without any contextualization of the project. Architects, they try to stretch them. The point here, the mind change could be thinking as a bricklayer, working with the existing things and trying to understand them in relationship with the new potentials, but you don't know from the first sketch what's going to be done. And this is the other difficult part for the reuse, I think. And also the aesthetic point of view.
Yeah, but that's exactly going back to the fact of the risk evaluation, right? Yeah. Because it's, I mean, it requires an architectural adaptability to work as a bricoleur and to be just work flexibly with what one finds. But obviously, if then there's an economic problem tied to the fact that one doesn't want that risk evaluation, then you go right back against the banking system, which is supposed to give you the loan. So
leaving a little space to the architect also to set up the program, because the program in that case comes from the spaces and not only from the needs of the client. You cannot adapt every program to the existing buildings you find. So architects should be also involved in the programmatic definition of what you put inside, because we have the eye to understand the culture, to understand how to treat the space.
I think it boils down to really negotiation on every single front in between practice, policy, communication with the users. I mean, it's the whole way, and it's beautiful to actually see that also as practitioners you're working in policy and practice in academia, because then at that point it's 360 degrees action, learning from new generations, understanding what structures can be generated to then host these new generations and creating a continuous loop. So I wanted to maybe wrap that up in with really the power of negotiation and flexibility, and really forgetting the tabula rasa, but somehow a more fluent way to practice. I was wondering if the students or anyone in the audience had any questions. Maybe we could have 10 minutes for questions if someone's keen. Super.
Thanks for the lecture, and I want to ask a question about the Saudi Arabia project of the Line City, and put aside about the scandal and the stuff. What do you think about the leaner city for the renovation and demolish for the old building and then recreate a new one, compared to the traditional city?
I just think that for centuries, I mean, people, they used to gather in a circle way, and it's difficult to figure out how, like, millions of people will stay along the line. I mean, it's if you do a party, people, they used to stay all together and not they stay in line. Cities are the same, so it's a little bit, I don't know how to organize social life inside of such a morphological crazy city. Maybe just by imposing to the inhabitants to live like prisoners, because I don't see any social normal behavior inside of a line 100 kilometers long.
It's now been reduced. I don't know if
they are trying. Good friends, they are working and they are involved in this project. They say it's gonna fail. I mean, everybody knows it, but they keep on working because they are really well paid.
We were invited, funnily enough, and we did not do it. Because I think from the very beginning on, and we stumbled upon it in a very early stage when there were only trailers, when you could think it's fiction, no? I think that we just questioned, because it was part of a research back then, who will build the city, who owns the city, no? And you have all around the world extreme forms of public-private partnerships where companies take over the role of the public to build a city. And I think then you have to ask yourself, why are they doing it, no? Because when we learn that there's always business and money behind, you should ask yourself, why would one do this, no? So I think the goal and the premise of a city changes, no? And when before a city was maybe about values that we defined as a society and inclusivity and brotherhood or whatever it was, then it just gets new values and profit plays a big role in it. So I would question who does it, for which society, and how do they envision who lives in their how together, no? And I think that when you look into this, what is the system and the thinking behind, then for us this is not agreeable with our value system. And then they could pay us as much as we want, because this future sounds like a dystopia, you know? Yeah. Don't take jobs where you think this is dystopia, just for the money. Will make you unhappy. Also conversations with the client, horrible. If the client is horrible, if you think the client is horrible, you will be in prison for years. You know, for what? For money. For money you will have to speak to someone that you hate. I mean, what a weird scenario, you know? So, I mean, who does this? Yeah. No, it's horrible, no?
Thanks. Thanks for
I think really as young practitioners, the agency of saying no. So it's not a matter of always saying yes. Like, you have the power to say no. If a project does not speak to your value system, say simply no, I'm not interested. Of course, maybe that month the belt will be a little bit tighter, but sure, I mean, as architects, we have agencies, so it's a matter of speaking and saying truth to that. Any other questions?
Thank you. Hello. I'm from Dominican Republic, so everything that I learn here, it's blows my mind every time. There's a lot of concepts that will take millions of years to actually go there. And I constantly think about how can I adapt what I learn here to Dominican Republic, which is a third world country, and it's not going through this exactly. So my question is, taking a country that's still being developed, that has other issues, that it's the lack of investment, how can I, like me as a starting practitioner, which I study interior design, but now I'm interested in architecture, what would be your position in where I am right now, and like what can I do with my country so I get to a point where maybe the money it's invested in a good, maybe because you know in the type of countries like that, sometimes the government doesn't have enough money to actually make these projects that are for the people. So my question is, there a way, have you thought about how can, going back to where we are right now as a country in Dominican Republic, what would you do as an architect or as a new person that's going back there eventually to not have this happen, or to develop in a good way in some way? Prevent, exactly.
It's a very difficult one. So this semester with the students, the first exercise we did together with Charlotte, here she is, from APFL, was 50 students did 50 Zooms with 50 architects all around the world, no? Asking about their idea on future practice, keeping the existing, building new, and I mean maybe it was an exercise to humble ourselves and the students, to make us realize that this is a very European discourse, no? We have to say this? Okay. But at the same time, all the projections on temperature and CO2 they are calculated in a way that, and if I'm allowed to say, don't call your country a third world country. You know, this logic comes from a system that classified countries by economic power, you know? So first world countries who created a lot, who produced a lot and also emitted a lot, made a system in which they classified those countries who don't produce enough products as third world countries. Yeah. And so, of course, then it becomes very difficult because you realize it's a European discussion and European discourse, and I don't have a recipe. I would, maybe you have to go, if the aim is of a lot of countries, which we heard in the interview, that we want to be as developed as first world countries, if this is the narrative, then maybe it's necessary to tell in your country the story that we are not more happy. You know, rather the opposite, that all of this did not lead to, or maybe it's creating a vision for your country, defining what are the values, what don't you want to lose, and how do you want to live together. It's very abstract. I have no answer to that. It's so we hope that certain things like an initiative you could get inspired and try to do there. Maybe the tool of storytelling is something that you could look more into, so that you understand that if a client comes with maybe with a wish that seems to be only the copy of what they have seen in films, in media, etc., it's not what they really need or want. They cannot even tell you why they want it. They just come because they want the image. We do this with our clients, where we have a contract that is not based on building costs, where they agree and sign and pay us with the risk that we tell them that we don't do what they ask for. So, because very often it's a misunderstanding that they want something based on a lot of references, a lot of narratives, a lot of, that's the story of the single family house. When you look into the story of the single family house in Europe, it was a decision by the market to tell a story that you actually want to live in a single family house. Did you know you want to live in a single family? Everyone wants to live in a single family house because there was an interest to build more single family houses, you know? So I think that this is a cultural shift that maybe you can take elements and try to go back and build a practice that helps people understand what they actually want. Because, you know, there's just not, again, price or value to certain things. So you can ask, is the big house you dream of as an architect, is it worth that you will work 24/7 to pay off the loan? Like, you know, what is the value of free weekends, free time? That's also a question we ask in the magazine to architecture offices. How can you price in things that have not a price? Because right now only productivity has a price. And in that system, it's really problematic because every natural catastrophe is good for the economy. That's really fucked up, you know? Like when there were the big floodings in Germany, GDP goes up because the flood, as a consequence of climate change, destroys a valley. Then the company comes to take away the trash. Then the company comes to prepare the land. Then the company comes to build a house. The materials have been produced. So every natural disaster is a boost for that economic system that basically says we are so productive and therefore first world and you're not productive enough. Yeah.
Yeah, on that actually there was a really interesting article on The Economist which actually kind of looked at it from the other perspective in the sense that we might be going back to the crisis of 2007-2008 because something that we thought was so secure, so fixed with the kind of climate crisis that we're facing isn't so fixed anymore. I mean, you continuously see figures of assets, of houses as assets, which, I mean, with floods. So actually, at a certain point, then really the kind of climate crisis becomes the really problematic in a certain sense to the asset. So yes, now the GDP goes up, but at what cost? And going forward, can we get to a point of implosion in which you cannot invest in the brick anymore because it just isn't safe? So we had a house in France, and my parents realized that it was in a valley which was prone to flooding, and they're like, you know what? I mean, if you then look at the taxes of inheritance in France, which is 50%, they're like, I'm not up for that. So, and in a certain sense, going back to your question, with Milan, we found ourselves in the 90s saying that we want to create an attractive city. And that's when we started investing capital, and that's when projects was in a very simple way, mind you, for the simplicity. We started developing projects as Costa Nuova and really as City Life. If you ask Milanese people what the value that created for the people, it's not that much. It created a huge investment in the city, the building of an image of a city, the attractive city, so incremental amount of tourism, incremental amount of people coming to work. But if you look at the fabric of the city, of the people who actually live the city and want to continue to live in the city, it became unaffordable. A lot of the people now cannot afford to live in the first and the second cittadinity and are moving towards the periphery. And that was because we wanted to create a city which was attractive, but which was built on a model of other big cities like New York, like London. But was that really appropriate for Milan? My personal opinion is no, but the beauty is that there's 1,000 different opinions. But in a certain sense, even as a kind of developed country, I mean, we were seeking always a kind of convalidate, like an approval from something else. And that creates a system which just is simply flawed. So I think we can, Tim, do you want to wrap us up?
Ice is not stopping.
Yeah.
Listening and admiring this conversation. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for. Once again, I want to thank the students for inviting and listening to this very important discussion, very important questions, the biggest questions perhaps of our time, systematic change, and how that can take place, and as practitioners, how we can be part of that discussion. I think the power of tonight's guests are agreeing on many points and discussing others which don't have consensus fully. But so thanks to all of you for your time and your ideas, and join me in thanking them, guys, okay?